In a world where arrogance often blinds people to the truth, one woman's sense of entitlement pushes her into a confrontation at 35,000 feet. But what she doesn't know is that the boy she humiliates isn't just any passenger. He's the heir to the very airline she's flying on. What begins as a fight over a seat quickly spirals into a lesson about respect, power, and humility. The soft hum of boarding passengers filled the cabin as the sleek doors of the aircraft closed, behind Ethan Carter. At just 16, he carried himself with the quiet poise of someone far older. His dark blazer was pressed. His polished shoes clicked lightly against the carpeted aisle, and in his hand, he clutched a crisp boarding pass for seat 3A, his very first time flying first class. His eyes shone with excitement as he approached. The window seat he had been dreaming of, but his heart sank when he noticed it was already occupied. A woman in her late 40s sat with her legs crossed and a designer handbag spilling over onto the armrest. Her luggage, oversized and expensive, crowded the space beneath her feet as though she owned not just the seat, but the entire cabin. Ethan paused politely and cleared his throat, leaning slightly forward. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said gently. "I believe this is my seat." Victoria Hale tilted her head upward, her sharp blue eyes landing on him with the kind of practiced dismissal only years of entitlement could sharpen. She looked him up and down, her lips curling into a faint smirk. "This? No, sweetheart, you must be mistaken. First class isn't for kids like you. Economy is that way." She gestured vaguely toward the back of the plane with a flick of her manicured hand, her tone dripping with condescension. Ethan, still calm, extended his ticket. The bold black print clearly displayed Seat 3A. "I'm sure there's no mistake," he said politely. "This is my seat." Victoria barely glanced at the ticket before waving it off with a scoff. "Oh, please, I've been flying first class for years. The airline must have made some error in their system. Do you really expect me to believe you belong here?" Her voice lifted slightly, loud enough for other passengers to turn their heads. The whisper of curiosity began to stir among them. Ethan shifted on his feet, uncomfortable under the stares, but his voice never faltered. "I'm sorry, but this seat was assigned to me. I'd appreciate it if you'd allow me to sit." The woman let out an exaggerated sigh, rolling her eyes as though the boy's very presence was an inconvenience. Then, with a dramatic wave, she called out, "Flight attendant, over here, please." A young woman in a neat navy uniform appeared, swiftly, her badge reading Sophie Miller. She approached with a professional smile, though her eyes carried the hint of concern she reserved for situations that often grew tense. "Yes, ma'am. How can I help you?" Victoria leaned back, her voice projecting with false indignation. "This boy is trying to claim my seat. I don't know how your system works, but I've been assigned this spot for years. There must be some mix-up." Ethan handed over his ticket without hesitation. Sophie scanned it, her brows furrowing slightly as she checked her tablet. A moment later, she looked up with certainty. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but this seat does belong to Mr. Carter. You're seated in 12C, economy class." A wave of murmurs rippled through the surrounding passengers. Victoria's face hardened, her lips tightening into a thin line. "Economy?" she repeated, her voice dripping with disbelief. "Absolutely not. I paid for this seat. I deserve this seat. Do you really expect me to move for him?" She jabbed a finger toward Ethan, who stood silently, his expression calm, though his posture betrayed the awkwardness of being at the center of unwanted attention. Sophie kept her voice steady, though her patience was tested. "Ma'am, the records are clear. This is not your seat. I'll be happy to help you find your correct one." But Victoria's cheeks flushed with indignation. "This is ridiculous. I'm not moving. Do you know who I am? I've been a loyal customer for years, and now you want me to squeeze into the back because of some oversight?" Her words were sharp, her tone growing louder, enough to draw the eyes of nearly everyone in the cabin. Phones were quietly lifted, cameras discreetly angled to capture the unfolding scene. Ethan, standing with quiet dignity, made no move to raise his voice. Instead, he simply folded his ticket back into his jacket pocket and stood by the aisle, watching Victoria's resistance unravel into a spectacle. His silence was not weakness, but composure. The flight attendant shifted nervously. Realizing the situation was escalating beyond her authority, she leaned in and spoke softly to Victoria, urging her again to move, but the woman's voice only grew louder, her refusal firmer. At that moment, another crew member slipped toward the cockpit, her face tight with concern. The captain needed to be informed. Within minutes, Captain James Rowe appeared at the cabin door, his presence commanding and steady. He was a man accustomed to crises at 35,000 feet, but even he recognized the peculiar tension of this one. He stepped forward with measured calm, his voice even. "What seems to be the problem here?" Passengers watched closely, some leaning forward in anticipation, as Victoria prepared her defense. She straightened her posture and pointed dramatically toward Ethan. "This child is trying to take my seat, Captain. I paid for this. I won't be bullied out of it." The captain turned his gaze to Ethan, who remained standing quietly, eyes steady, expression patient. Then he looked at Sophie, who handed him the ticket. His eyes scanned the details, and without hesitation he nodded. "The seat belongs to Mr. Carter." His tone left no room for doubt. Yet Victoria's jaw tightened. Her cheeks flushed red and she crossed her arms defiantly. "I don't care what your records say. This is mine." And there, in that small standoff between dignity and arrogance, the stage was set for what would soon become an unforgettable lesson in respect, witnessed by every passenger aboard. Captain. James stood in the aisle, his calm presence filling the tense cabin as he addressed Victoria with the steady tone of a man who had seen many disputes, but rarely one so laced with arrogance. "Ma'am," he said evenly, "this seat is assigned to Mr. Carter. We cannot proceed until the matter is resolved." His words were firm, but Victoria's face twisted with indignation. She leaned back against the leather seat as though anchoring herself there by force of will. "I am a loyal customer," she snapped, her voice rising enough for half the cabin to hear. "I fly this airline constantly. I've spent more money on these flights than half the people on board combined. And now you want me to move for some kid? This is insulting." Her words rang with entitlement, and a few passengers exchanged uncomfortable glances. Captain James maintained his composure, though his jaw tightened. "Loyalty does not change the seating assignments, ma'am. The ticket is valid, and the seat is not yours." Victoria scoffed and waved her hand dismissively, her bracelets jingling with the motion. "Don't lecture me about tickets. You people make mistakes all the time. Look at him," she said, pointing directly at Ethan. "Does he look like he belongs in first class? He's just a boy. I've earned this spot." Her tone sharpened with unspoken insinuation, her eyes narrowing in a way that carried more weight than her words admitted. Several passengers stiffened at the racial undertones, their discomfort obvious as the cabin's once light chatter died into silence. Ethan stood rooted in the aisle, his ticket still in his pocket, his face composed despite the sting of humiliation. His calmness was deliberate, as if he knew that meeting anger with anger would only fuel her fire. A flight attendant quietly approached him, whispering that another seat in first class had been freed up and asking if he would like to take it. Instead, Ethan hesitated for a moment, glancing at the woman who still occupied his rightful place, then nodded gently. With quiet dignity, he walked down the aisle and slid into the alternative seat without complaint. His restraint struck those watching. They saw in him not weakness, but strength, the ability to rise above ugliness without losing himself to it. A man across the aisle lowered his phone slightly, whispering to his wife, "That kid's got more class than she ever will." Victoria, however, took Ethan's silence as victory. She adjusted her designer scarf and smirked to herself, crossing her legs with exaggerated grace. When a flight attendant asked if she needed anything, she leaned in smugly and ordered champagne, emphasizing the word as though it were a trophy. "And make it quick," she added, loud enough for those nearby to hear. She tugged at her diamond bracelet, then leaned toward a woman sitting 2 seats away. In a conspiratorial whisper, just audible enough, she said, "Kids like that should learn their place. First class isn't for everyone, no matter what the computer says." The woman beside her stiffened, offering no reply, but her disapproval was evident in the way she turned her shoulder and avoided eye contact. Throughout the cabin, the atmosphere shifted from irritation to unease. A few passengers discreetly raised their phones, recording the exchange. One man muttered under his breath, "Unbelievable," as he hit record. Victoria basked in what she believed was her triumph, unaware that her words and actions were being preserved for the world to see. Meanwhile, in the VIP section a few rows ahead, Amelia Carter observed the scene quietly. Her posture was elegant, her demeanor calm, but her eyes held a sharpness that revealed she missed nothing. She made no move to intervene, her pen moving silently across the small notepad in her hand as she took notes. To those who noticed her, she looked like just another composed first-class traveler, but there was an undeniable weight to her presence, the kind of authority that required no announcement. Her gaze lingered on Ethan, her son, who now sat upright in his new seat, calm and collected, embodying every lesson she had ever taught him about strength and restraint. Victoria continued to flaunt her supposed victory. She sipped her champagne, with a triumphant tilt of her chin as though daring anyone to challenge her. She adjusted her jewelry so it caught the cabin's soft lighting, letting the sparkle remind those nearby of her wealth. She leaned back, satisfied, as if the matter was closed. Yet around her, the atmosphere grew colder. The passengers were no longer amused by her theatrics. They were unsettled, offended, and quietly enraged at the disrespect she had shown. Captain James, still standing nearby, leaned down one last time, his voice quiet but firm enough for Victoria to hear. "Ma'am, your behavior is unacceptable. I suggest you consider how you wish to proceed for the rest of this flight. We have a duty to ensure every passenger is treated with respect." His words carried the weight of authority, not threat, but Victoria brushed them off with a haughty laugh. "Oh, please," she said dismissively, waving him away. "You can't touch me. I've been flying with this airline long before you were even captain. Don't lecture me. I know my status." Here, her confidence oozed as she sank back into the seat that was never hers to begin with, her smirk widening as if she had won a great battle. She believed her wealth, her loyalty points, and her attitude made her untouchable. What she failed to realize was that the eyes of the cabin were no longer filled with indifference, but judgment, and in those eyes, she had already lost. The cabin had settled into a fragile calm when the seatbelt sign chimed, and the plane lurched gently through a pocket of turbulence. Glasses rattled against trays, and a few passengers gripped their armrests, as the aircraft shuddered before leveling again. Captain James's voice came over the intercom, steady and reassuring. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing a bit of turbulence, nothing to worry about. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. We'll be through it shortly." His calm tone eased the tension, but the brief shake seemed to unsettle Ethan more than he let on. He sat upright, his hands folded in his lap, his expression steady, though his shoulders carried a quiet stiffness. From the VIP section, Amelia Carter rose with grace, her movement drawing a few curious glances. She walked with unhurried composure down the aisle toward Ethan, her heels clicking softly against the carpet, her posture tall and commanding. When she reached him, she bent slightly, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Are you all right, Ethan?" she asked, her voice warm with maternal care. He looked up at her, his face softening with relief, and nodded. "I'm fine, Mom." The simple word, Mom, fell like a stone into still water, sending ripples of surprise through the nearby passengers. Several people leaned closer, whispering among themselves as recognition sparked in their eyes. A man across the aisle furrowed his brow and murmured to his wife, "That's Amelia Carter, isn't it? The chairwoman of Skylux Airlines." His wife's eyes widened as she nodded quickly. Another passenger, clutching his phone tightly, whispered to his neighbor, "She owns the airline. She's in charge of all of this." The whispers grew, spreading like wildfire from row to row, until the entire cabin buzzed with hushed astonishment. Victoria, still seated defiantly in the chair that was never hers, overheard the whispers. She tilted her head and scoffed loudly as if to brush away the suggestion. "Oh, please," she muttered under her breath, though her voice carried enough for others to hear. "She doesn't own anything. Do you really think the chairwoman of an airline would fly with us? It's just gossip." She waved her hand dismissively, but the flicker of doubt in her eyes betrayed her bravado. Amelia straightened and turned toward the surrounding passengers, her voice calm yet firm enough. "To Carrie, allow me to clarify," she said evenly. "Yes, I am Amelia Carter, chairwoman of Skylux Airlines, and this young man—" She rested her hand once more on Ethan's shoulder, her eyes glowing with pride. "Is my son, Ethan Carter, the heir to this airline's legacy." The words landed like thunder. Gasps filled the air, and several passengers covered their mouths in shock. A man in the back let out a low whistle, while others exchanged wide-eyed looks. The cabin was alive with astonishment, the realization striking everyone at once. This was no ordinary teenager. Victoria's face drained of color as though every ounce of confidence had been pulled from her. She stared at Amelia, then at Ethan, her lips parting soundlessly. The mocking smirk that had decorated her face earlier was gone, replaced by a pale mask of disbelief and dawning humiliation. She had not only disrespected a fellow passenger, but insulted the very family that commanded the airline she was flying on. Her hands, once so steady when lifting a champagne glass, now trembled faintly against the armrest. Amelia's eyes, though calm, carried a steel edge as she addressed the woman without raising her voice. "In this airline, respect is our policy. No passenger is above another, especially when they believe money buys dignity." Her words were simple, but they struck like a gavel, echoing with the authority of someone who lived by principle rather than arrogance. A hush lingered for a beat, and then, from the back of the cabin, soft applause began. It spread forward, gentle at first, but growing as more passengers joined, clapping for Ethan's restraint and Amelia's unwavering poise. Some passengers even cheered quietly, nodding toward Ethan with admiration. Ethan, still seated, flushed slightly with embarrassment at the attention, but his calm expression never faltered. He lowered his gaze modestly, unwilling to gloat. His composure in the face of such humiliation now shone all the brighter against Victoria's collapse. Victoria swallowed hard and attempted to speak, her voice stumbling as she searched for words. I didn't realize... if I had known..." Her excuses faltered under the weight of the truth, her words tangled in desperation. She glanced around, but the faces that stared back at her were no longer indifferent. They were judgmental, disapproving, silently condemning her. Captain James stepped forward once more, his voice carrying with the steady authority of command. "Ma'am, your behavior today has been completely unacceptable. Your treatment of this passenger and your disregard for the crew's instructions are serious violations of our policy. This matter will be reviewed when we land. I remind you that this airline has zero tolerance for discrimination." His words sealed her fate, leaving Victoria slumped in her seat, her arrogance drained, her so-called status shattered. Around her, the passengers no longer whispered, but watched openly, many of them satisfied that justice had finally surfaced mid-air. And as the cabin returned to its uneasy calm, one truth had been made clear. The real measure of status was not wealth, but character. And on that day, Victoria Hale had been stripped of hers. The descent into the city was smooth, but the atmosphere inside the cabin remained heavy with the weight of what had unfolded. As the wheels touched down and the engines roared to a gradual halt, many passengers exchanged knowing glances, already anticipating what awaited at the gate. Victoria sat stiffly in her seat, her earlier confidence now replaced with a nervous tension she couldn't disguise. The champagne glass on her tray sat untouched, her hands folded tightly in her lap. When the doors finally opened and passengers began to disembark, a group of uniformed airline security officers stepped inside. Their presence was calm but unmistakably official. One of them leaned down toward Victoria, his tone firm yet professional. "Ma'am, you'll need to come with us. We've been instructed to inform you that your frequent flyer privileges have been revoked, and you are now permanently banned from flying with Skylux Airlines." The words struck her like a blow. Her face crumpled with disbelief, and for once, she had no sharp retort to offer. Murmurs spread through the departing crowd, some passengers shaking their heads with quiet satisfaction at the consequence she had earned. As she was escorted out of the aircraft, a handful of passengers lifted their phones, discreetly capturing her exit. Those same phones had already caught her arrogance mid-flight, and within hours of landing, the footage began circulating online. Clips of her refusing to move, of her dismissive comments, of Amelia's calm reveal, spread across social media like wildfire. Headlines appeared on news sites within the day. Entitled, "Passenger Humiliated After Disrespecting Airline Owners." Sun and con first-class arrogance goes viral. Conversations erupted across platforms, debates about entitlement, prejudice, and the true meaning of respect dominating comment sections and talk shows alike. Ethan, meanwhile, walked quietly beside his mother through the terminal, his head held high but his expression thoughtful. Though the ordeal had left him shaken, there was a sense of pride within him, not for winning any kind of confrontation, but for keeping his composure when it would have been so easy to lash out. His calmness had been his shield, and it had left a stronger impression than any argument ever could. Passengers who had witnessed the incident firsthand approached him with kind words, some patting his shoulder, others simply offering nods of respect. A man who had filmed part of the exchange leaned down and said softly, "The way you handled yourself, your patience, it taught all of us something." Later, in the quiet of the lounge, Amelia turned to her son and placed a hand on his. Her eyes held both pride and tenderness. "You did more today than stand your ground," she said gently. "You showed the world that true strength doesn't come from shouting the loudest, but from standing steady when others lose themselves." Ethan smiled faintly, the weight of the ordeal still lingering, but her words settling into him like a seed of wisdom he would carry forever. Victoria's world, however, began to unravel. As the viral video gained traction, her name surfaced. In connection with the incident, media outlets dug into her business history, uncovering patterns of arrogance and complaints from colleagues and associates. Clients distanced themselves, wary of being tied to her name. Invitations to exclusive events quietly disappeared. Her friends stopped answering her calls, unwilling to defend behavior so publicly condemned. Alone in her apartment, she watched. Herself on screens across the nation, her dismissive hand wave, her smug smirk, her damning words replayed endlessly. For the first time, she saw not the powerful, sophisticated woman she imagined herself to be, but a reflection of entitlement and cruelty. The humiliation that burned within her forced reflection, and though pride still clung stubbornly, humility began to creep into her thoughts for the first time in years. Back at the airline, Captain James met Amelia and Ethan once more before they departed. His handshake was firm, his voice carrying the respect of a man who had seen countless passengers, but rarely such dignity in someone so young. "Thank you both," he said. "Your patience and composure turned what could have been chaos into a lesson for everyone on board. I won't forget it." Amelia smiled warmly, her gaze steady. "Respect costs nothing," she replied. "But arrogance, it can cost everything." Her words lingered in the air like a final judgment, simple yet powerful. As the day closed and the story continued to ripple across the world, the moral became clear not only to those who had witnessed it, but to millions who watched from afar. It was a reminder that status and wealth are illusions, if not paired with humanity, that true worth is measured in how one treats others, not in what one owns. In the end, a boy's quiet dignity had defeated arrogance more loudly than any confrontation could. And as the narrator's voice faded with the final lesson, the truth resonated like the closing of a book. Respect is free, yet it is priceless, and those who forget it often pay more than they ever imagined.